Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, a series of explorations of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics for Nintendo Switch. Today's game is Frogs and Flies, which was a 1982 release from Mattel as part of its M Network series. Now, if you're not familiar with M Network, they've come up a couple of times on this series already. It was a label from Mattel where they ported Intellivision games, as Mattel was the company behind the Intellivision, and they often had to cut them down a little bit to fit on the Atari 2600 and be able to work properly on them. And they tended to get a slight name change as they came across as well. So this game was originally called Frog Bog on the Intellivision, and it became known as Frogs and Flies in its 2600 incarnation. It's actually not a completely original game though. It's basically a clone of Sega's 1978 arcade game, which was just called Frogs. And supposedly that was the first game to ever feature a jumping character, predating Nintendo's Donkey Kong by a good few years. So this particular game can be played in both single and two-player modes, which is always nice for a 2600 game. You don't have to rope someone in to play with you if you don't want to, or can't. But anyway, let's go play Frogs and Flies.
Okay, here we are once again with Atari Flashback Classics. This time we're taking a look at Frogs and Flies from M Network, which is Mattel's brand, bringing Intellivision classics and less than classics to Atari 2600. So let's have a look at the manual. Here we are, Frogs and Flies TM, instructions for 1 or 2 players. The object of the game is to make frogs catch flies. Points are won by manipulating a frog so that he jumps off a lily pad and scoops up flying insects with a flashing tongue. Jump him too late and you'll miss. Jump him too far and he'll land in the pond. You'll have to wait for him to swim back before trying again. Day and night action. Catch more flies than an opponent or beat your own top score. So, this is very similar to Frog Pond, which we saw last week. But it's quite a bit better because there are more mechanics to this, basically. And it's just a bit more of an interesting game. So basically, you jump up and down and catch flies. And you get 2 points for every catch. Ooh, excuse me, hiccups. Right, and you have a time limit of about 3 minutes in this one. So it's not about misses this time. Misses. It's about a time limit. And you'll see that the game screen will gradually change colour as you go through to represent day turning to night. Okay. So, you can adjust the difficulty switches in this one. Both players don't have to play at the same difficulty level. In B for beginner mode, the frog jumps in a fixed arc every time, and the frog will not fall in the water in the easy game. In the harder game, you have these controls here. So you can push in any direction on the joystick, 8 directions anyway, and that determines how high your frog jumps and in which direction. And then you press the fire button to lick. So, winning tips. Don't fall in the pond. Your frog will be out of business. You'll have to wait until he swims back to the pad before you can try for another score. Watch the time. Remember, an inactive frog won't stay inactive. In the one-player game, the computer could beat you by working the other frog automatically. And when any frog is not moved for 15 seconds, the computer will take over. So that's how you can play this in single-player mode. You're basically still playing a 2-player game, but the computer is playing instead. So, let's have a quick go against the computer, and then I will pass over to Future Pete, who will commentate over his experiences playing this in 2-player mode against both his and my wife, Andy. Let's begin. So, that is left over from our early recording session. So, bring up the console, change the power, off we go. Okay, so I am the grey frog. So, basically, the way this works is the longer you hold the joystick in a direction, the higher you will jump. And the direction you push the joystick will determine the arc of your jump. Oops, not doing too well so far. So what you need to do is you need to estimate how far and how high and in which direction you need to jump to catch the flies that are coming through the screen. Quite a bit harder than it looks. Alright, up, up and away. There's one for me. Now equalised with the computer. Oh, just missed. Alright, let's get that one. There we go. Lovely. Now we're in the lead. See, just the variation in the control in this game makes it a much more interesting, much better game than Frog Pond ever was. And I would place good money on the fact that the additional features that the guy behind Frog Pond wanted to put into Frog Pond and was refused by Atari because making 8K cartridges was expensive, don't you know? I bet the stuff in this is the sort of thing that he wanted to add to Frog Pond to make it a more interesting game. And the fact that this exists shows that there was a market for it. I have no idea how well this game sold or anything like that, but it exists. It was put out. It was available on both Intellivision and Atari 2600. Implying that it did well enough on Intellivision to warrant Mattel porting it to Atari 2600. Nice. 2 in 1 jump. I am the Frog King. But, yeah. I mean, as with Frog Pond, it's not a particularly deep or complex game or anything like that. But it's not terrible. It's not terrible at all. It's an interesting twist on the sort of competitive collect everything or shoot everything formula. It's, I guess you'd call it non-violent. I mean, it's not non-violent for the poor flies, of course, but, you know, flies are flies, so fuck them. But yeah, this would have been a good family game. The parents would have no doubt been quite happy to play with their kids. Not that there are a lot of particularly explicitly violent games on the Atari 2600 anyway, but you know how things are. Sort of games about shooting things have always been a bit of a scapegoat, and when you look at this one, which is just about natural things happening in nature, as natural things tend to do, then yeah, you can see how this would have probably been a lot more palatable to parents with young children. And anyway, that is the end of a single-player game of Frog Pond. No, Frogs and Flies. Frog Pond was last week. Frogs and Flies. Formerly Frog Bug on the Intellivision. Anyway, with the blissful sound of crickets over the now empty pond, I will hand you over to Future Pete, who will tell you all about his experiences in 2-player mode. See you in a moment. Okay, Future Pete here once again with Frogs and Flies from Mattel's M Network in 2-player. So we've already seen the single-player variant of this, where you just leave the computer to it for a few seconds and they will take over control of one of the frogs. And this is 2-player mode, with once again my wife Andy helping me out on player 2 duties. I am playing the grey frog and Andy is playing the red frog. And as you can see, this unfolds much like the single-player mode, only now you're playing against a human opponent instead, which means that your opponent will be slightly less predictable, particularly while they're figuring out the controls and learning how to do things. And of course, there is always the risk of your opponent claiming that their controller isn't working, or that you didn't explain something from the rules of the game. But this game is so simple that it's kind of impossible to get to a point where you can't have explained any of the rules to them, because all you do is you jump and you lick, and that's all you do in this game. So there are no rules to not explain in this one, which is good, because that prevents any sorts of arguments or disagreements over the score. You'll also notice in this game that every target is worth the same value, unlike Frog Pond, which we saw last time. Which means that competition can be reasonably close in this, with 2 people who are equally skilled. And because you've got things like the variable jump height and angles in this, there is a bit more of an element of skill to this. But it's not so complex that someone who's never played it before can't pick the process up almost immediately. And it feels a lot less random, particularly in 2-player mode. So, whereas in Frog Pond, by this point in the game, we were both jumping around randomly and just sort of hoping that we would run into something. In this one, you jump a lot more strategically and sort of jumping when you're absolutely sure that you're going to hit a target. Or when you think you're going to hit a target, at the very least, anyway. So yeah, this is a much better game than Frog Pond, despite being essentially the same mechanic and being a rip-off of Sega's Frogs, as we mentioned at the beginning. It works well as a two-player game. As a single-player game, it's not super interesting. There I am trying to... we spent a little bit of time trying to lick each other's bums in this game, as you do, because we are children. But yeah, night is falling now, so we're approaching the end of the game. And that's the other nice thing about this game, is you have a hard time limit on this one of, I think it was like 75 seconds or something, wasn't it? Which means that there is a concrete end to the experience, which means it doesn't drag on for ages. But equally, that does mean it's a little bit more likely that one player will get an advantage over the other. But at the same time, you both have all the tools at your disposal to be able to win. So yeah, we kind of enjoyed that one. It is a much better game than Frog Pond, but we'll leave that there. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.